And from Challenger Stories, I'm here with Lucy Adams, who's the co-founder and COO of Martee, which is an AI solution for the food industry. Lucy, tell me about Martee. What does it actually do?
So, hi Matt, great to be here. Yeah, so Martee is the demand forecasting and AI optimization solution for the fresh food sector. Essentially, what we give businesses is a daily volume for each product, for each store, that tells them how many to produce. So we work with businesses to help them to reduce waste and grow availability of fresh food through using AI to enhance our forecast accuracy.
Do you know what? When we've spoken before, obviously, and when you first told me about the product, it's one of those products, and I come across them every now and again. I think when you explained it in more depth, it became a complete no-brainer. It's like, if this doesn't exist, it needs to exist. So that the listeners can, or the viewers can understand it a bit more, could you provide a little bit more depth to the explanation in a kind of case study, if you like?
Yeah, sure. I actually have the perfect one to hand. So my co-founder and I actually set up originally a fresh food business ourselves. And the idea was we want to improve access to fresh food by providing it in locations where it's not always accessible. So we started a business actually in NHS hospitals selling fresh salads in vending machines, believe it or not. And one of the big challenges that we had in terms of scaling this business was actually working with fresh product. It was understanding how much to put in the different stores each day. Because what we found was that when you have fresh product, obviously it has a short shelf life, it's easy to waste. So we had high levels of waste, but at the same time, we were running out of stock of stuff. So we were missing out on sales. And both of these things were really frustrating to us as fresh business owners. And we were on this amazing mission wanting to scale this business, but finding it really difficult. So what we did was we started to work with some data scientists to build some forecasting models that told us how many of each product we expected to sell on each day. But initially, this looked at things like historical trends, but in time, it came to incorporate lots of things like the weather. Whether someone's going to buy a salad or soup for lunch will have a huge bearing on what the weather's like. So we started out by building some models for ourselves. In time, we managed to reduce our own business's fresh food waste by 82% whilst growing our revenue at the same time. And we came to realize that there was a huge optimization opportunity with the power of modern state-of-the-art data science that allowed us to basically improve the profitability, scalability of our business. Now, in doing that, we started speaking to other food businesses as well. And we realized that this was such a system-wide pain and such a barrier to businesses that wanted to work with fresh food but couldn't afford the risk. So that's kind of how we came to building our solution. And now we've actually sold the retail business, and our whole day-to-day is working with other businesses to grow their fresh food availability whilst limiting waste. So yeah, it's a no-brainer.
It is a no-brainer. So what I love about this story is what you did is you built a solution for a problem that you had. Then, having developed that, you recognized it was industry-wide, and now you're growing the business off the back of a very, very common problem. Pretty much built your own vineyard, and now you're drinking your own champagne, and now you're selling it to the other businesses that have got the same problem. Genius. Love it. I mean, if ever there were a pivot that made complete and utter sense, I think Martee's it, right? It's fantastic. Yeah.
100%.
So
I wish we drank more champagne. Yeah, that's been for us the kind of making of our success. And it's funny because as a founder, you feel like, will our investors, think worse of us because we changed our mind? But actually, it's completely the opposite. And having the kind of confidence and the strength to recognize an opportunity in what you've learned is actually what investors value most and what felt most kind of true for us.
Yeah, I get it. I sometimes, when I work with some startups these days, and probably less so, I tend to work with businesses that are more scaling. And what I find is that the urge to pivot is the next shiny toy. It's why don't we do this because we think there's a market for it. And in fact, you stop pivoting and then you just spin round in circles. You haven't done that. You've clearly identified what the problem in the marketplace was because you had that very, very acute problem. And then you focused in on that. How big's the marketplace?
I guess it's an interesting question. It depends how big you want to look. I mean, if we want to talk about fresh food in general, then it extends to businesses, far beyond those that we're currently servicing in the food to go space. You can think about, the ready to eat section in big grocery. So if you look at the UK's largest retailers, you walk into your local superstore, often there will be yellow labels scattered across the grab and go sandwiches, or they'll have run out of hot chickens by 5 o'clock, or, whatever it is that you want to
Wow.
buy. If there's a short shelf life on it, you can guarantee that there's either going to be a huge amount of waste or you're not going to be able to buy it. So for
Yeah.
us, like right now, we're setting our sights on that food to go space, which is kind of, you've got your pure play food to go, so your sandwich stores, your kind of ready to eat out of home stuff. But in theory, this extends far wider into the realms of retail and grocery and contract catering, anywhere that there's kind of a fresh food concession. I mean, arguably it extends beyond food, but I think that's kind of where we're boundarying what we're looking
Yeah.
at the moment.
I mean, just in terms of what the food offering is, or the offering to the food and hospitality and retail industry. I mean, it's enormous. Just hospitality in one area, and then when you look at the fast food to go, and then as one aspect of that, and then you lead into retail, which is obviously another different sector completely. Actually, it's vast, isn't it? It's absolutely huge, and it's businesses ranging from pretty small to right up the way through to the multiples. Have you got a nailed-on customer? Or in fact, I'll take that question back. I know you've got a nailed-on customer because you're smart enough to realise what your customer base is in the first place. So, what's your initial bridgehead in terms of your ideal customer profile?
Ideal customer is, at the moment, we're working with actually quite a lot of businesses in the sushi sector. Now, sushi is an interesting market. I'd love to say that I came up with the idea to target sushi. I didn't. The customers came to us. But actually, sushi is really interesting, sushi concessions in particular. So if you go into your kind of local big grocery outlet, you'll see often there's like a sushi concession. Sushi's great because it has a really short shelf life, typically one day if it's good quality, a really high cost ingredient. So what we found is that the people that feel the pain the most acutely are those that have a short shelf life and a high cost of goods. And therefore waste is a big pain point. But if you don't have it available, then you're missing out on potentially quite a large sale because often these things cost more. So I think in short, sushi concessions.
But it's great to have a bridgehead, right? Because then you've got a focus for the business. Then you can
100%.
validate. Yeah, you've got product market fit pretty much out the bag, and then it's just a question of where do you scale next, I guess. But where are you scaling next?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're at the stage where we're still speaking to a relatively broad section of customers. There's no shortage of those that want this, but it's figuring out where to focus our energies. Now, one thing that's really interesting is that because we're working with businesses in the concession space, so they're store in store, they exist within a larger retail store, it gives us a kind of natural bridge into working with some of the larger retailers. So we can prove our value on those bits, and then we can start to look at the bakery concession, the deli, even potentially the fruit and veg range. So it gives us kind of that proof of concept to access some of those really large enterprise players that otherwise would be off limits.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's brilliant. I mean, I love this solution. I'm not just saying it because I'm talking to you right now. When I look at the things that need to happen right now, or things that are happening right now and that need to happen, sustainability, cutting down on food waste, vital. Really, really important that we do that. Fresh food, getting fresh food into the hands of consumers. Diet's a massive issue in the UK and in fact all the Western world. It's a huge issue. And having fresh food, you're more likely to get better ingredients, better quality product, less additives. So that's another thing it's tackling. And then utilizing AI in a way that's good, as opposed to there's lots of uses for AI that I see at the moment which are alarming people. But it's using the best of the technology and it's tackling a number of different areas that need to be tackled. So that's why I love the product. I think it's absolutely fantastic.
And I think, we are blessed really to be at the confluence of a number of really big cutting edge changes, whether it's sort of state of the art AI, the kind of integration of smart store technology. So retailers, food businesses are getting smarter, getting better data, which suits us really well. Third thing is obviously kind of government regulation. So it's looking at, the point you made, which is that, fresh food is increasingly important, but what do we actually mean by fresh food? And I think that businesses are being put under more pressure to interrogate their own healthy food offering, which, has lots of different interpretations. But broadly, it means things that are lower in fat, sugar, salt, and are less processed. And fresh food that is less processed, directly correlates to that. So, all the time the government, literally the other week, government set out a load of new regulations around food businesses having to report on what they're doing to be more healthy. How are food businesses supposed to deliver more healthy food if they don't have the tools to do it profitably? So yeah, I think what we're doing is really, increasingly in demand. And that's really exciting for us.
Yeah, it's enabling the better end of the food industry, because there are elements of the food industry which, selling highly processed foods and stuff that isn't very good for people. There is no lobby for, aubergines and courgettes don't have a lobby group,
Mm,
but high fat foods do. But actually, what you're doing is you're moving the dial back towards people's health and well-being, and you're helping businesses at the same time. And that's going to increase employment, more profit on the bottom line to these companies. So it's all good. It's all positive. What was the biggest challenge in switching from one model to another? Because you did a
mm.
really smart pivot. Where did it hurt to do that?
I mean, it was a really, we talk about it like it was this kind of clean switch and we turned off one business and turned on the other. And actually, the reality is, as founders, it's really, really hard to throw away good work. And, we talk a lot about, having the confidence to pivot, but it's also having the resilience to stick with something, through the tough times. And for us, it was such a kind of a battle, an internal battle of, do we actually, let go of this retail business? We built it, it's profitable, it's revenue generating, and go back to zero revenue and start something software heavy. I think for us, the hardest thing was really saying, despite the fact that we've built a business that has a brand that people love, that generates revenue, that investors are happy with, we're gonna sell that and focus, because focus is absolutely everything at the early stage. And for us, I think that the hardest thing was saying, even though we have, really all we have is our own experience and some other interviews, we think this is the big play. We think this is how we change the food system. And so we're going to sell the retail business and focus on software. That was a really, really hard call.
That's a huge call. You've got a fledgling business that's just starting to show real signs of success, and then you spin and do something completely different. What was your meetings like with your investors to say, look, guys, do you know what? We sold you on this idea. In fact, we're going to do this other shiny toy over here. What was the reaction? How
I
did
mean,
you sell that in?
our investors have been brilliant, I must say. And I think not everyone would have the same experience that we have. I think my fear as a first time founder was, oh my God, they're going to think we're like complete lunatics. How can we have gone from so passionately pitching this retail business to pitching this software business when neither of us are technical and we've got revenue and they're delighted with the traction that we've got in our first business? But actually, I was surprised by the reaction that we got. I think everything, this is pre-seed stage. Everything at pre-seed is narrative, story, understanding, positioning. And we're both so passionate about the problem that we're trying to solve and the opportunity, the market opportunity, right? That something that is B2B and software based represents. So I think certainly we faced questions and there were differences in opinion from some of our investors, but I think ultimately everyone backed the decision that we made and continues to this day to recognize the power in the story that we have and the determination that we have to make a true impact that goes beyond becoming another retailer or another brand.
I guess you made that really brave decision that comes down to, if I focus on this, it means I can't focus on that.
Yeah.
And doing the sums, lots of businesses want to grab at different things and the next shiny toy. And the massive challenge around that is understanding that if I deploy my resources here, I have to say no to something which is really quite valuable to me. That's a really tough call to make.
Yeah.
And I take my hat off to you for making it. I think it's fantastic. Tell me, what were the challenges around bringing a new product to market? Because you were in the industry anyway, so you probably had a few contacts potentially. How did you go about doing it? How did you go about saying, we've built this, drink our champagne now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the first thing is AI education. Like, technology is not something that exists widely throughout the food industry and that people are necessarily happy to adapt to. I think, whilst for us as relatively startup minded, tech affiliated founders, we were kind of like, we could see the value. Not everyone will see that value without it kind of being spelled out to them or, demonstrated to them through their own business. So where we thought, we have a conversation and we say, look, this is a no-brainer. We're saving you money. We're making you money. We're, saving you time. Not everyone will see it in that way. And I think one of the challenges that we've had is kind of convincing people as to the value of what we bring. And whilst, a lot of people have a huge amount of super valuable experience of when it comes to forecasting, for example, they know how many they usually sell or who their regular customers are. It was kind of getting people to trust and understand that the technology that we've developed is good and sometimes better and often just a lot more efficient. So I think that's been one of the key things. It's like, and I think this is true of a lot of sectors. People are not necessarily technology native. So how do you sell them a product that, does stuff for them, and get them to trust it? I think one of the other challenges is, or has been, working with businesses that have like really kind of different data. So whilst again, we were working with best practices, we were an early stage fresh startup. Some businesses have been around for, 20, 30 odd years. And so they haven't necessarily built the best data practices. So the kind of step before helping them with better forecasting is better data. And I think that's been one of the things that we've had to kind of adapt to and learn to as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially going on that business journey, you've got some legacy businesses that are in the industry that it's quite hard to educate to get to the point where they're going to adopt it. But actually, you've had businesses coming to you. So some businesses have got that very acute, very well-defined pain point. With expanding the business, where do you believe where does your bridgehead expand to? Because you mentioned sushi.
Yeah.
Where does it go from there?
So we're working with some customers in the sort of sandwich, sort of grab and go food space at the moment, as well as in bakery. So those are both interesting markets in that, again, it's like a very much a finished end product. For us, I think the kind of expansion, I guess, exists beyond that into like either shorter shelf life, more shorter shelf life stuff, or higher value stuff. And then broadly, what we want to do eventually is have systems impact. We want to make it as easy to sell, fresh, high quality, ready to eat food as it is to sell chocolate bars and ultra processed long life stuff that can sit on your shelves for years.
Yes.
So, how we get from A to B, it could exist in a number of different, via a number of different pathways, but that's the impact that we want to have. And so we've got that kind of vertical look at the moment, which is, well, we're working with concessions so we can work with more grocers and more retailers, or we're working with concessions so we can work with other ready to eat providers in, more pure play food to go environments like QSR.
How do you decide what is the right type of, or the right next adjacent sector is? How do you deploy your resources in that? Because, as just said, if you're doing one thing, it means you can't do the other. You're in a startup, resources are really tight. Time is the one thing that you do not have the luxury of. Both, there might be a competitor who's just seen what you're doing and going, oh, that's a great idea, let's come on board and disrupt. And actually the amount of time, 24 hours in a day, obviously you're not going to work every single one of those. How do you decide on what's the one that's really valuable for you?
I think it's a good question. We have a few different frameworks that we look at. I mean, it's the classic thing of, right, like, do you want to scale through loads and loads of small customers very quickly, or do you want to scale with loads and, a smaller number of larger customers where each one represents a much larger chunk of, business? And I think we've chosen to go after the larger chunk of business, so the sort of fewer larger customers, from the point of view that data is power. And so working with a customer that has lots of data makes a lot of sense. We can provide really great forecasts to them from very early on. And, they bring in more business to us that allows us to then go on to serve more customers and build our technology. So that's where we've started. I think strategically, the other kind of consideration is then how can we prove our use case to give us the means to expand into other like adjacent sectors. So the kind of concessions decision has been almost like a Trojan horse strategy, which is how can we prove it to the retailers? So that's like the kind of second piece of the puzzle. So there's like the logistical considerations, and then there's kind of signaling to further customers consideration.
If you were going to do something differently, given your time again with the business, what would you have done?
I think there are some things that I would have liked to have done earlier. For example, I spoke about the decision to pivot, and actually, yes, we made a decision. There was a point in time where we sold the retail business and we said we're going to focus, but actually we probably could have done that 6 months earlier. And that probably would mean that we're a bit further along than we are now. So I think that's definitely one thing I would have done differently, is like being a bit more critical with that decision earlier on, and had the kind of, I guess, the confidence to sort of let go earlier on. I think another thing I'd have done would have been to try and diversify our customers. And by that, I don't mean into more sectors, but into having more leads early on. So we fell into the trap, as many businesses do, of getting one fantastic customer as our first customer. They were brilliant. And we worked with them for several months to kind of build our MVP and We, ran some trials with them, and they paid us, and it was brilliant. And we had, made some hiring decisions around the revenue that we could see coming from them. And then they completely changed their business model and no longer needed forecasting services. And it was absolutely gutting. We should have had more eggs in more baskets. But also we were really unlucky. And I think had things gone the other way, we would have been patted on the back for taking a well-educated risk and making it happen with fewer resources. So arguably it was unlucky. But I think for me, building that pipeline before you're ready to service it, and it's always a trade-off, right? You don't want to overpromise and then not be able to deliver. But building that pipeline earlier on, I think for us would have saved us a lot of hard clawing back work afterwards. So yeah, that's definitely one thing I think for next time.
You've managed to get back to a position of growth, a position of strength. I think the book Crossing the Chasm has got a few lessons in there about that, about working with early adopters and how to move to mid-market and Luddites, etc. And it sounds like you're very much on that journey. It sounds like you are in the midst of crossing that chasm at the moment. You're going from early adopter, early market, and you're starting to veer into the mainstream market. And you're no longer reliant on one small set of customers or one customer in general. So, okay, that's a great lesson. Thank you so much for sharing that. What do you think your big challenges are going to be moving on for the next 12 months?
I think some of the challenges remain the same. So some of it, the journey continues with AI. People are, excited about it. People are scared about it. People have bad experiences with it. And then, the cycle continues. So I think that remains a challenge. I think for us as well, we've worked with several early customers in kind of a more consultancy style, and we're starting to move towards more of a kind of plug and play SaaS solution. But actually, when you work with a new customer, you need to understand their data, you need to integrate with their data. So we're working on our AI, not just as a forecasting tool, but as a data integration tool. And so one of the key challenges is how can we onboard customers quickly so that we can service them, but also provide them with a highly tailored business specific output. So that's one of the kind of core challenges that we're looking at the moment. The other thing is looking at, I mentioned earlier that people on the ground often have a lot of lived experience, a lot of kind of entrenched learnings about how their customers behave and what people do with their businesses. And we don't want to replace that. We actually want to use that. So it's like, how can we bring humans into the loop meaningfully such that their lived experience and what they see on the ground can inform our technology? So again, it's looking at kind of alternative forms of AI. It's looking at how, large language models, not just as a part of a forecasting solution, but as a means of inputting more data and more richness. And so all of those things are kind of what we're looking at over the next year or so.
Okay. So they're the actions that you're taking. Where do you think the challenges are going to be? Because they are kind of their growth strategies. They are some of the actions you will take. They're kind of OKR type things.
Yeah.
Where do you think your pain points are going to come?
I think businesses don't have a lot of budget for software right now. And one of the challenges is differentiation from other players in the market, not just in the software space, but, how do you actually get businesses to part with money on the basis of, potential perceived returns? So one of the challenges is that, and I think we've noticed over the last year or so, there's been a lot of economic uncertainty, and that has been reflected in the appetite of customers to part ways of money, even for kind of relatively low commitment pilots. So I think that's one of the key challenges. I think as well, the narrative around healthy food, fresh food changes a lot. We've seen some really, really good things in kind of the regulatory space around pressure on businesses to work with fresh products. But all the time that things get uncertain, businesses are insecure, they will turn to what is safest and what is known, which means less fresh products, which means more long shelf life processed items. And therefore the impetus to invest in technology to grow their fresh assortment isn't necessarily there. So I think that's another thing that we'll need to contend with and think carefully about when we're looking at where we target our customer growth.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because then you look at, and you mentioned sushi, and someone who buys sushi generally is more considered about their food purchases. They're more considered about their diet. They're less likely to be the guys going to run off to Subway every other day or to go and get a Mackie D's. So actually, what you're saying in that statement that you just made is actually it's not just your customer, it's their customers that are just as important. It's a really good insight. That's very, very astute. I like that. It's great that you picked up on that. I think it's very well considered. Okay. All right. So they seem to be the challenges. So What inspired you to create a business in the first place? Because what made you get that entrepreneurial rush of blood to the head where you decided that you were going to be the last one to get paid, you were going to be the last person to get a raise, you were going to work insane hours, get no thanks? What made you do it?
Yeah, when you put it like that, sounds like a pretty bad choice. No, it's interesting. So I definitely wasn't one of these people that was born with like a streak of entrepreneurialism in my blood and knew I wanted to start a business. It wasn't really something that crossed my mind until I was probably about 22, 23. So like at university, I was really focused on the kind of academic route, stroke kind of looking at corporate careers. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I'm actually a human scientist by background. So basically I'm really interested in complexity and people and food and health and everything that goes in between. And I started my career in public policy advisory, so nowhere near the entrepreneurial space. I think for me, I've always cared about having an impact, and I've never really known what the right kind of mode or vehicle to have that impact has been. And I've kind of just followed my nose at every stage. So for me, working in public policy advisory, like, wasn't a great fit. I think I felt that whilst I loved the kind of intention around what was going on, I needed to be closer to the action myself and doing things and making things happen.
Yeah.
And it was actually only through seeing my partner, who was very entrepreneurial, going out into the world and starting his own business, that I sort of thought, well, if you can do that and that changes tomorrow because you've had an idea and you've tried something, you've tested something, maybe I could as well. And maybe that's actually an amazing way to have impact and be close to it. So I moved quite quickly from the world of public policy consultancy into startups as a kind of relatively early stage junior employee in a food business, working kind of on the front line of rapid grocery, which was a really cool thing to be a part of a few years ago. And through there, I got some experience in startups and sort of, I guess I grew in confidence that I could actually do it, make it happen. I was lucky enough to have some amazing mentors in my early career. And eventually, came to a place where I found a fit between what I was passionate about and an opportunity to start a business through Founders Factory and Nesta's Venture Builder platform, which is fantastic. And I guess that was like my kind of initial jump into the founder world.
Fascinating. So what inspired you?
There's been a few people along the journey for sure. The first, I think, is a lady called Obi Felton, who was, I think she was called head of getting moonshots ready for contact with the rest of the world at Google X. So she came in and did a talk when I was at university, and she studied a very similar subject to me. And she was this, firstly, like female role model, which is important, and was also working in a tech role, in a tech leadership role. And for me, as somebody that was in, pretty much in the arts, didn't feel like, I hadn't even thought about the idea of working in technology, and technology being such a kind of impactful way of engaging with the world and making things happen. So that was the first thing. I think other things, I've been very inspired by Henry Dimbleby, who's the author of the National Food Strategy. He's also the founder of Leon and has written some awesome books as well.
Right.
And I think seeing the way that he's transitioned through working with the public sector and the private sector, and now he's got an investment fund. And I think that kind of that view of looking at, a vertical and an impact as a strand, rather than sort of necessarily being a specialist in anything particular, and then working across the sectors to make, changes here and there. I think that's something that I've tried to hold very true throughout my career, through being, on the academic side of things and the public policy side of things, and then also in the startup world, and realizing that, your niche doesn't need to come from being hugely skilled or specialist in something particular, but having one really big problem that you're really passionate about and just thinking about that tirelessly throughout your life. So that's, I guess, where I come from and how I felt like the entrepreneurial path has suited me.
What would you say to your 18-year-old self?
That's a big one. What would I say to my 18-year-old self? I think one thing I'd say is that, like, often it can be quite existentially challenging, especially as an 18-year-old, to know what you're good at, what you should pursue, where to start. And that can be quite paralyzing. And I think that one thing I've learned is that being a generalist can absolutely be your niche and actually your superpower, especially in the world of startups where you have to just spin a lot of plates. So that's certainly one thing. I think another thing is I'm quite a sort of social, outgoing person, but I think oftentimes, especially where I've had a lot of work on, whether that's, through my role as a founder or through my academic career, I felt that, going out and seeing people and meeting people is kind of like a nice to have, a luxury. And actually, where I've been pushed to do those things through more recently, my current role, and actually with my co-founder, who's a very kind of outgoing, sociable person as well, I've had so much serendipitous value from just meeting people that comes back around. And I think that viewing that as actually networking or socializing as a crucial part of building stuff has really kind of amplified, I think, my growth and my exposure to other people. And then I think the final thing is that I've definitely learned to respect me and respect others a lot more for being quite direct rather than necessarily saying what they want to hear. And I think that that's something that, especially as kind of a young female founder, that I've had to learn sometimes the hard way. But actually being clear, being direct, people know where they stand and feel comfortable challenging you, and you end up having a much more productive conversation. So yeah, I think that's probably the other thing that I kind of probably could have aced when I was 18 if I'd thought about it that way.
Do you know, many of the things that you speak about there, or many of the things that that business leaders struggle all the way through their careers. So it's not exclusive to an 18-year-old, and it's not exclusive to a 40 or 50-year-old in the boardroom. It's across the board, and it's great advice no matter how old you are. So, Lucy, thank you for that. Lucy, it's been an absolute joy speaking with you today. I've got to say, I think the business is fantastic. I think the product is market changing. It's a game changing product, right? So I don't need to wish you luck with developing the business. I'm just looking forward to the next time we speak, and I can hear more and more about the development of the business and how you're taking the industry by storm. So, Lucy Adams, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure today.
Thanks so much, Matt. And I've loved sharing as well. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.